Wyoming, 1883. There are two kinds of journeys a man can take. One has a map, a destination marked with a firm X, a purpose that pulls him forward like a draft horse in a harness. The other is just walking. It is the journey of a man who has already arrived at the end of things and found it empty, and so turns his back on it and puts one foot in front of the other because the only alternative is to lie down and let the dust take him. Elias Thorne was on the second kind of journey. His map was the sun, his compass, the ache in his bones. He walked west. He had been walking west for 3 months since the ground had thawed enough in Nebraska to let him go. He had left behind a plot of land that was no longer his and two graves that would be his forever. Mary and little Clara. The fever had been a thief in the night, silent and efficient, taking the breath and the light and leaving behind a silence so profound it had its own weight. He had sold the farm for what he could get, which was not much. He had packed a bedroll, a skillet, a sack of flour and beans, and a small, worn photograph. Everything else he had left in the house, standing just as it was, as if he were merely stepping out for a moment, as if someone might be coming home, but no one was. His only companion was a dog named Gus, a scruffy brown animal with one floppy ear and eyes that understood the geography of sorrow. Gus walked at his heel, never straying, his tail giving a hopeful twitch now and then that Elias no longer felt capable of himself. The dog was a living link to the before time, a warm presence against his leg in the cold nights, a witness to his hollowing out. The land they moved through was vast and indifferent. It was a canvas of sagebrush and sky, of raw-boned mountains in the distance that looked like the spine of some great, sleeping beast. The beauty of it was a language Elias no longer spoke. He saw the practical things: a creek for water, a deadfall for firewood, a rise in the land that might offer shelter from the wind. He had stopped expecting more. He had stopped expecting anything at all. His days fell into a rhythm that was almost a comfort in its emptiness. Wake at dawn, brew coffee over a small fire, share a piece of hardtack with Gus, walk, stop at midday, eat, walk again until the light began to fail, make camp, eat, stare into the flames until his eyes burned, sleep. He was a man whittled down to the bone of his own grief. He was 42 years old, but he felt ancient, a relic of a life that had already ended. The man who had laughed with his wife and swung his daughter into the air was a ghost who walked beside him, a constant, silent reproach. He did not know where he was going. California, maybe. Oregon. Some place where the ocean met the land. A place so different from the endless plains of his loss that he might be able to breathe again. Or maybe he would just walk until he could not walk anymore. It made no difference. The walking was the thing. The steady, punishing rhythm of it was the only prayer he had left. Then he saw the wagon. It was a speck in the distance at first, a disruption on the long, flat line of the trail. As he drew closer, the speck resolved into a familiar shape, a prairie schooner, its canvas cover stark white against the dun-colored earth. It was stopped. Not camped, just stopped. Dead in the middle of the trail. The two horses that should have been in their traces were grazing peacefully a short distance away, hobbled. A problem. Elias slowed his pace. His first instinct, the instinct of a man who wanted nothing to do with the world of other people, was to give it a wide berth, to cut off the trail and pass by without a word. Problems were for people who still had stakes in the world, people who were going somewhere. But Gus trotted ahead, his tail up, curious, and Elias saw them then. A woman and a small boy. The woman was standing by the left rear wheel, her back to him. She had a hand on her hip, a posture not of despair, but of assessment, of calculation. The boy, no older than 7 or 8, sat on the wagon tongue watching her. Elias stopped. He could still turn away. He did not have to do this. He had no obligation. But then the woman knelt, peering under the wagon, and he saw the dark hair pulled back in a severe, practical knot, the determined set of her shoulders. She was not waiting for rescue. She was trying to solve the problem herself. Mary had had shoulders like that. He felt a lurch in his chest, a flicker of something that was not quite pain and not quite memory, but a ghost of both. He sighed, a sound of weary resignation. Gus looked back at him as if to say, "Well?" Elias walked forward. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Looks like you've found some trouble," he said. His voice was rough from disuse. The woman stood up slowly, turning to face him. She was not startled. She had clearly heard his approach. She was younger than he had thought, perhaps not yet 30. Her face was plain but strong, dusted with the fine powder of the trail. Her eyes were a clear, steady gray. They took him in, his worn clothes, his trail-hardened face, the dog at his side, and she gave a short, decisive nod, as if confirming a calculation. "The axle," she said. Her voice was as steady as her gaze. "It's split. I can see that." He walked closer, Gus following, and squatted down to look. The heavy oak axle had a deep, wicked crack running through it, splintered and raw. It was a bad break, a trip-ending break for most. "Can you fix it?" she asked. It was not a plea. It was a direct question, woman to man, professional to professional. She was asking for an appraisal of his skill, not for his pity. He ran a hand over the splintered wood. He thought of his own workshop back on the farm. The solid feel of the lathe, the scent of wood shavings, the satisfaction of a clean joint. He had all the tools in the world back there. Here he had a knife, a hatchet, and whatever was in her wagon. "I can try," he said. "It won't be pretty, and it won't be permanent, but it might get you to the next town." "The next town is Fort Laramie," she said. "That's 100 miles. "Then it will have to be a good fix," he replied, looking up at her. For the first time, a small hint of something else softened her expression. Not a smile, but an acknowledgement, a shared understanding of the stakes. The boy, who had been watching them with wide, silent eyes, slid off the wagon tongue and came to stand near her, his small hand gripping the fabric of her skirt. "I am Sarah," she said. "This is my son Leo." "Elias," he said, standing up. He nodded at the boy. "Well, Elias," she said, her tone shifting back to business. "What do you need?" And just like that, he was no longer a man walking away from everything. He was a man with a job to do. He worked for the rest of that day and all through the next. The work was a balm. It was a language he knew, a problem with a physical solution. It did not require him to feel anything, only to think, to measure, to cut, to fit. First, he had to jack up the wagon. They used a heavy screw jack from her supplies, and he braced it with rocks. He showed Sarah how to work it while he kept the wagon steady. She listened to his instructions, her brow furrowed in concentration, and worked the lever with a steady, even strength. She did not complain. She did not falter. He had to find wood for a splint. The plains offered little. He walked with his hatchet for nearly a mile before he found a stand of cottonwoods near a dry creek bed. He chose the hardest, straightest limb he could find and chopped it down, dragging it back to the wagon. Gus trotted beside him, carrying a smaller stick proudly in his mouth. He spent hours shaping the wood, his knife and hatchet becoming extensions of his hands. He stripped the bark, hewed the sides flat, carved a groove to fit snugly against the curve of the broken axle. Leo sat on a crate a few feet away, watching every single movement. The boy was as silent as his mother, his gaze intense. After a while, Elias took a scrap of wood and with a few quick cuts, carved a rough shape of a bird. He held it out to the boy without a word. Leo took it, his small fingers tracing the shape, and then looked up at Elias with a solemn nod of thanks. Sarah, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of quiet competence. She did not hover over him. She seemed to understand that his work required focus. Instead, she went about the business of their temporary camp. She built a fire, her movements economical and practiced. She cooked a meal of bacon and beans, and the smell made Elias realize he had not eaten a hot meal in days. She tended to her horses, speaking to them in a low, soothing voice. She had a small tent, which she set up for herself and Leo. She laid out his bedroll near the fire without asking, a simple, unspoken assumption that he would be staying the night. When he finally stopped for the day, his hands raw and his back aching, she was waiting with a tin plate of food and a cup of coffee. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the whisper of the wind across the grass. It was a comfortable silence. He had forgotten what that felt like. The next day, he fitted the splints. He had made two, one for the top and one for the bottom, sandwiching the broken axle between them. The hardest part was binding them. He needed something that would not stretch or break. "Is there any chain?" he asked her. She shook her head. "No, but I have this." She went to a trunk inside the wagon and pulled out a long strip of rawhide, thick and stiff. It was for mending harnesses. It was perfect. He had her soak it in a bucket of water to make it pliable. Then together they wrapped it around the splints, pulling it brutally tight. He used a stick as a tourniquet, twisting and twisting until the rawhide groaned and the wooden splints bit into the axle. As the rawhide dried in the hot sun, it would shrink, creating a bond almost as strong as iron. "It'll hold," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm. He looked at their joined hands on the stick, her smaller, calloused ones next to his own. "It'll hold to Laramie." She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 2 days. "Thank you," she said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she had not said, the fear she had not shown, the worry she had kept hidden from her son. They packed up the camp. He helped her hitch the horses. The wagon stood ready, the repaired wheel looking solid and true. His job was done. His bedroll was already rolled and tied. He could nod, wish her well, and walk away. He could go back to being a ghost on the trail. It was what he should do. It was the sensible thing. He slung his pack over his shoulder. Gus whined softly, looking from Elias to the wagon and back again. Sarah stood by the driver's seat, her hand on the brake lever. Leo was already inside the wagon, peering out the back. "Well," Elias said, the word feeling clumsy in his mouth. "Good luck to you." She did not answer immediately. She just looked at him with those clear gray eyes. She was reading him, he realized, the way a sailor reads the sea. She was seeing the hollowness, the lack of destination in his own eyes. Then she said, "Ride with me." It was not a question. It was not an offer of payment. It was a statement, an invitation. "I'm not going your way," he said, the lie tasting like ash. "You're not going anyway," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. "You're just walking. I'm going to Oregon. There's good land there. Ride with me, to Fort Laramie at least, in case the wheel gives trouble." It was an excuse, a practical reason for an impractical offer. He knew it. She knew it. He looked at her, then at the boy's face in the back of the wagon. He looked at the long, empty trail stretching west. For 2 days, he had had a purpose. He had had a place. He had eaten food cooked by another's hand. He had heard the sound of a human voice that was not his own. To go back to the silence seemed for the first time like a choice he did not want to make. "All right," he said, "to Laramie." She nodded, a quick, satisfied dip of her chin. "Get in." He hesitated. "I'll walk," he said. Beside, he did not want to be a passenger. He would be a guard, an outrider, a fellow traveler. She seemed to understand this too. She climbed into the driver's seat, clucked to the horses, and the wagon lurched forward. Elias fell into step beside the slowly turning wheels, Gus trotting at his side. He had not left her side since. They moved slowly, carefully, favoring the mended wheel. The first few days, Elias checked the rawhide bindings every hour, but they held as tight as a promise. The creak of the wagon wheels, the clink of the harnesses, the soft thud of his own boots on the dirt became the new rhythm of his life. A strange sort of domesticity bloomed on the trail. They did not talk much. Words seemed unnecessary. Their partnership was built on a foundation of shared tasks, of actions that spoke louder than any conversation. In the mornings, he would rise first, building the fire up from the embers of the night before. By the time he had the coffee boiling, she would be up, her hair already braided, ready for the day. She would cook breakfast while he checked the horses in the wagon. They ate together, Leo sitting between them, kicking his heels against the crate he used as a chair. During the day, she drove and he walked. It felt right. She was the captain of this small, rolling ship, and he was her first mate, her scout. He kept his eyes on the horizon, watching for trouble, for water, for a good place to camp. Gus was his second in command, ranging ahead and then circling back, a tireless, furry scout. Leo slowly, cautiously began to emerge from his shell of silence. He would walk with Elias for short stretches, trying to match his long stride. He would ask questions, not about where Elias came from, but about the world around them. What kind of bird is that? Why is the sky so big? Can Gus really smell a snake? Elias answered him in short, direct sentences. He found he did not mind the boy's presence. It was like having a small, curious shadow. One afternoon, he taught Leo how to tie a bowline knot. The boy's small fingers struggled with the rope, his brow furrowed in intense concentration. When he finally got it right, he looked up at Elias with a grin so full of pride it almost hurt to look at. It was the first time Elias had seen him smile. It reminded him of Clara. The thought came with a familiar sharp pang of grief, but for the first time it was followed by something else, a quiet warmth. The journey was changing him. The emptiness inside him was still there, a vast cold space where his family used to be. But now there were small things growing in the margins, the smell of Sarah's coffee in the morning, the weight of Leo's hand on his arm, pointing out a lizard on a rock, the soft nudge of Gus's head against his knee by the fire at night. They were small points of light in a great darkness. It means the world to know where this voice is reaching. What country are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments below. Your presence here, sharing these stories, is what gives this channel its heart. Now let's get back to the trail, because Elias is beginning to understand that some journeys are not about the destination at all, but about the company you keep along the way. One evening, they made camp by a small, clear river. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and cottonwoods. After supper, Sarah took their clothes down to the water to wash. Elias sat by the fire, sharpening his knife, while Leo and Gus played a game of fetch with a stick near the river bank. He watched her. She knelt on a flat rock, her sleeves rolled up, scrubbing a shirt with a bar of soap. Her movements were strong and efficient. The fading light caught the stray wisps of hair around her face, turning them to gold. She was not beautiful in the way Mary had been. Mary had been soft curves and easy laughter. Sarah was all straight lines and quiet strength. She was like the prairie itself, unadorned, resilient, and possessed of a deep, subtle beauty that revealed itself slowly. He realized he had been watching her a lot. He knew the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating on a difficult patch of trail. He knew the way she tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear. He knew the sound of her breathing in the tent at night, a soft, steady rhythm that he listened for before he fell asleep. This knowledge settled in his gut with a disquieting weight. Their arrangement was temporary. To Laramie, she had said. They were only a few days out now. Soon, this small, temporary world they had built would dissolve. She would find a proper wheelwright, and she would not need him any more. She would continue on to Oregon, to her new life, and he would go back to just walking. The thought was unbearable. It was a foolish thought. He was a man with nothing, a drifter. He was a decade older than her, a man whose heart was a graveyard. What could he possibly offer a woman like her? A woman who was building a future? He was a piece of the past, a relic. It was simple arithmetic. His age, plus his poverty, plus his grief equaled a sum that had no place in her life. He was so lost in his thoughts that he did not hear her approach. "The fire's dying," she said, her voice pulling him back to the present. He looked up. She was standing over him, her arms full of damp, clean clothes. Her face was cast in shadow, but he could feel her eyes on him. "I'll put another log on," he said, his voice thick. She did not move. "You're quiet tonight." "I'm always quiet," he answered. "Yes," she said softly, "but this is a different kind of quiet." She was right. His usual silence was a comfortable, empty thing. This silence was loud, full of all the things he could not say. She sat down across the fire from him. Leo had tired of his game and was now curled up asleep in a blanket by the wagon, with Gus lying faithfully at his feet. The world had shrunk to the two of them, the fire and the vast, starry darkness. "We'll be in Laramie in 2 days," she said. It was not an accusation, just a statement of fact. "I know," he said. He waited for her to say the rest, to thank him for his help, to wish him well. He braced himself for it, but she did not. Instead, she asked a question. "You don't talk much about where you're headed, Elias." "Just west," he said, the old, evasive answer. She looked at him, her gray eyes seeming to see right through him, right down to the bedrock of his sorrow. "I was hoping," she said, her voice very low and very clear, "it would be with us." The words landed in the silence between them. They were not a question. They were a confession, a hope laid bare, and they shattered his careful, miserable arithmetic to pieces. He could not speak. He could only stare at her, at this impossible woman who saw a future in a man who thought he was finished. He felt a terrifying urge to tell her everything, to tell her about Mary and Clara, about the farm, about the hollowness that he carried like a second skeleton inside him, to warn her that he was broken, that his heart was a barren field where nothing would ever grow again. But he did not, because as he looked at her, at the quiet courage in her face, he realized that she already knew. Maybe not the details, but she knew the shape of his loss. She had seen it in his eyes from the very first day, and she was offering him a place beside her anyway. He was a man drowning, and she had just thrown him a rope. All he had to do was take it. But what if he pulled her down with him? The next 2 days were a quiet agony. He walked in a fog of indecision. Her words replayed in his mind over and over. "I was hoping it would be with us." His mind screamed at him to be practical. Arithmetic. He was 42, she was 29. He had nothing but a bedroll and a past full of ghosts. She had a wagon full of supplies, a destination, a son. She was a beginning. He was an end. It was not a fair trade. He would be a burden, a shadow on her new life. The decent thing to do, The honorable thing was to see her safely to Laramie, thank her, and walk away. To let her go on to the bright future she deserved, unencumbered by his darkness. But his heart, a stubborn, foolish organ he had thought long dead, argued back. It did not speak in numbers, but in images. The way Leo's face lit up when Elias praised his knot tying, the comfortable silence of sharing a meal with Sarah, the simple, profound rightness of walking beside her wagon, of being part of this small, traveling family. It was a value that could not be calculated. It was not arithmetic. It was something else entirely. He started counting differently. He was a man who knew how to fix things. He knew how to hunt, how to track, how to read the weather in the clouds. He knew how to build a house from the ground up. He was steady and he was strong. He could protect them. He could provide for them. These were not things you could measure in dollars, but they had weight. They had value. Maybe, just maybe, it could be a fair trade after all. The day they were to arrive in Laramie, Leo was walking beside him. The boy had been chattering away about the fort, about seeing other people, and maybe buying a piece of candy. Elias had been answering in monosyllables, his mind a battlefield. Suddenly, Leo stopped and tugged on his sleeve. "Elias, what is it, son? You're not going to leave in Laramie, are you?" The boy's voice was small, his eyes wide with a worry that mirrored the storm in Elias's own chest. Elias looked down at the boy's earnest, upturned face. Here was a truth that cut through all his tortured calculations. "I like it when you're here," Leo said simply. "Mama does, too." It was the voice of a child, speaking a truth so plain and powerful it felt like a judgment from on high. It was not about what was sensible. It was about what was good, about what felt like home. Elias knelt down so he was eye level with the boy. "I like it here, too," he said, his voice thick. And in that moment, the battle was over. The decision was made. He was not going to be practical. He was going to be brave. He stood up, took Leo's hand, and walked toward the wagon where Sarah was watching them, her expression unreadable. He did not have to say a word. She knew. Fort Laramie was a sprawling, chaotic hub of noise and people. It was a shock to the system after the profound quiet of the trail. They found a wheelwright, a burly man with a sooty face who looked at Elias's handiwork with a professional's eye. "Damn fine trail fix," the man grunted, running a thumb over the hardened rawhide. "Held up better than some I've seen come out of a proper shop. You got a knack for it." While the new wheel was being fitted, Sarah went to the mercantile to resupply. Elias went with her. It felt different, walking beside her in a town. It felt public. It felt real. Inside the store, a man in a clean suit and a fancy hat tipped his hat to Sarah. "Mistress," he said, his voice smooth as butter, "I heard you were arriving. I'm the land agent here. I'd be happy to look over your claim documents, make sure everything is in order for your arrival in Oregon." He completely ignored Elias, dismissing him as nothing more than a hired hand. "That's kind of you," Sarah said, her voice polite but cool, "but my partner and I can manage." She glanced at Elias, a small, significant look that included him, that claimed him. My partner. The agent's eyes flickered to Elias, taking in his rough clothes and trail-worn appearance. A flicker of disdain crossed his face. "Of course," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Just be careful who you trust out here." "I am," Sarah said, her gaze steady. "Very careful." The man finally took his leave, and the storekeeper, a balding man with kind eyes who had overheard the exchange, came over. "Don't mind him," the storekeeper said in a low voice. "He's slick as a wet rock. That's a good woman you've got there," he added, looking at Elias. "You're a lucky man." Elias looked at Sarah, who was calmly checking items off her list as if nothing had happened. He felt a swell of pride, so fierce it almost buckled his knees. "I know," he said. It was the first time he had ever said the words and truly believed them. They left Laramie the next morning with a new wheel and a renewed, unspoken commitment. They went to the registrar's office before they left. Sarah filed her claim for 320 acres in the Willamette Valley. On the line for head of household, she wrote her name. On the line next to it, for a spouse or partner, she paused, looked at him, and then carefully wrote Elias Thorne. The journey to Oregon was long, but it was no longer lonely. It was a journey of building. They were not just traveling, they were becoming a family. The landscape changed, the plains giving way to rugged mountains, and then, finally, to the lush, green promise of the valley. A year later, Elias stood on the porch of the cabin he had built. It was a small, sturdy house made from the timber he had cleared from their land. A curl of smoke rose from the stone chimney. Below him, a field was plowed, the dark earth promising a good crop. Sarah and Leo were in the garden, pulling weeds. Leo was taller now, his face tanned by the sun. Sarah's hair was coming loose from its braid, and she pushed it back with the back of a dirty hand, laughing at something the boy said. Gus lay at Elias's feet, his tail thumping a contented rhythm against the porch boards. This was it. This was the destination he had never known he was looking for. A place, a purpose, a family. The ache of his past was still there. It would always be there. The ghosts of Mary and Clara lived in a quiet room in his heart, but they were no longer the only occupants. The house of his heart was bigger now. It had new rooms, filled with new light, new sounds. The sound of Leo's laughter, the sight of Sarah's smile. She looked up then, as if she felt his gaze, and her smile widened. She left the garden and came to the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She handed him a cup of coffee. It was a ritual they had, an echo of their first meal together on the trail. He took it, their fingers brushing. He looked at her, at this strong, quiet woman who had seen something in him worth saving. "I was hoping," he said, his voice soft, repeating her words from that night by the fire, "it would be you." She leaned against the porch rail beside him, looking out at the life they had built. Her smile was calm and certain and everything he ever needed. "I know," she said. "So you see, the story of Elias and Sarah is not really about a broken wagon on a long trail. It is about the quiet courage it takes to hope again when you have every reason not to. It is about understanding that a person's true worth is not measured by what they have lost or by the arithmetic of their age or their bank account. It is measured in the strength of their hands, the steadiness of their heart, and their willingness to show up when they are needed. Elias thought he was too old, too broken, too poor to deserve a second chance at happiness. He was counting with the wrong kind of math. He was counting his losses, his years, his empty pockets. Sarah taught him to count differently. She counted his competence, his kindness, his quiet loyalty. She saw not the man he was, but the man he could be. She saw his value, not his price. Their journey teaches us that sometimes the greatest destinations are not found on any map. The most important frontiers are the ones we cross in our own hearts. It is the decision to stop walking away from life and instead to walk alongside someone, to build something new, even on the foundations of old sorrows. It is the realization that home is not a place you find, but a place you make, with the people who choose to see the best in you and who simply say, "Ride with me." Thank you for your time and attention today. It is you, the listener, who keeps this channel and these stories alive, and for that, I am truly grateful. I hope you carry a piece of this story with you, and that you find the courage to count the true value in yourself and in those around you. Until next time, be well and be good to one another.